She learned the sound of chains before she learned the sound of her own name. And scraping stone, a slow, cruel whisper that echoed through the basement like a warning, meant only for her. The walls were old, older than mercy, and damp with the breath of the mountain that pressed against them. No windows, no moonlight, only a single torch outside the iron door, its flame flickering like it was afraid to stay alive. She lay curled on the cold floor, wrists bound above her head, silver biting into skin already marked by time and silence. Tonight was the Luna Ceremony. She knew because the pack above her would be awake now, their laughter rising through the stone like a mockery, their drums beginning to beat. Boom, boom, boom. Heartbeat she was not allowed to have. They called her nothing, no title, no lineage. Just the chained one, born under a cursed moon, they said. A girl whose scent never awakened, whose wolf never answered. In a world where power was everything, she was proof of shame. So they hid her, buried her beneath their feet, like a secret they hoped the moon goddess would forget. Every year during the Luna Ceremony, when mates were chosen and futures sealed, she was locked tighter, as if fate itself might smell her and come looking. She pressed her forehead to the stone, breathing through the ache. Hunger had long stopped screaming. Now it whispered. Her body was thin, but her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone forgotten. She listened. She always listened. The drums grew louder. The ceremony had begun. Above her, wolves would kneel beneath the open sky, lifting their faces to the moon, waiting for destiny to strike like lightning. She would remain in the dark. She always did, until the air changed. It happened slowly at first, a shift so subtle she thought it was her imagination. The torch outside the door flared, its flame stretching unnaturally tall. The stone beneath her palms warmed. Then something else, a presence heavy, ancient. It pressed through the basement like a storm, pushing against locked doors. Her breath caught. Her heart, long trained to beat quietly, stuttered once, hard enough to hurt. Above, the drums faltered. She felt it before she heard it, silence. A wrong kind of silence. The kind that only comes when something powerful demands attention. Then footsteps, not hurried, not hesitant, measured. Each step carried weight, like the earth itself was bracing. The iron door trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. She lifted her head, eyes wide, pulse racing for a reason she didn't understand. And then he inhaled. It was a single breath, drawn somewhere above the basement, deep and sharp. The moment it happened, pain exploded in her chest. Not injury, recognition. Heat surged through her veins, burning away years of cold. Her chains rattled violently, metal shrieking as if it knew it was no longer enough. She gasped, the sound tearing out of her like it had been trapped for years. Above ground, the Alpha King froze. Gale of the Black Crescent Pack had ruled for a decade without challenge. Alpha King of all northern territories, conqueror, executioner, the male other. Alphas feared and bowed to before he ever spoke. His presence alone could make wolves submit, could make warriors drop to one knee without knowing why. Tonight he was meant to choose a Luna. The ceremony had gathered. Every noble bloodline under the full moon. Females stood in white, scented and prepared, hearts racing with hope. But Kale smelled nothing they offered. Instead, cutting through incense and perfume and ceremony, came something impossible. The scent hit him like a blade to the throat, raw, untamed, ancient. It wasn't sweet or polished, it was moonlight and iron and fire, buried under years of suffering. His wolf roared awake, violent and desperate, slamming against his ribs like it wanted out. Kyle staggered a step, fists clenching as the world tilted. "Alpha?" someone whispered. Kale didn't answer. His eyes had gone black. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd, the hall, the open night. The scent wasn't here. It was below, buried, hidden, chained. His jaw tightened. "Who is kept beneath this hall?" he asked, his voice low but carrying enough force to silence every breathing soul. No one answered. Kyle's gaze sharpened. The ground cracked beneath his boots as he took a step forward. "I asked," he said again, colder now. "Who is down there?" Fear rippled through the elders. Finally, one stepped forward, voice shaking. "An abomination, Alpha King, a failed birth. She has no wolf. She is nothing. Kale's lips curled, not in amusement but in fury, because his wolf was screaming one word over and over, with a certainty that made his blood burn. Mine? In the basement she felt it. Whatever he was, whoever he was coming. The presence grew closer, heavier, until the walls seemed too small to hold it. Her chains pulled tight as her body reacted on instinct, muscles straining towards something she had never known, but somehow always missed. The iron door exploded inward. Wood and metal slammed against stone. Torchlight flooded the room, harsh and blinding. She shrieked, curling in on herself, shielding her face. Footsteps entered, slow, deliberate. The air changed again, thick with dominance so overwhelming it stole her breath. Kyle stopped at the sight of her. She was smaller than he expected, bruised, barefoot, wrapped, in rags that barely hid the marks of restraint. Chains bit into her wrists. Silver burned into skin that glowed faintly under the torchlight. Moon-touched. Her hair spilled around her like a shadow. And when she finally looked up at him, her eyes... Kale sucked in a breath so sharp it hurt. They were not weak eyes. They were old. Recognition slammed into him with brutal clarity. His wolf surged, howling in triumph and rage. The bond snapped into place like fate itself had been waiting for this exact second. The Alpha King dropped to one knee without realizing he'd moved. She stared at him, trembling. "Please," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken to anyone in years. "Don't let them hurt me again." Kyle lifted his head slowly, murder blazing in his gaze. Not at her, at the world that had chained his mate in a basement and dared to call her nothing. Above them the moon burned brighter, and the Luna Ceremony was no longer about choosing. It was about reckoning. If you felt that pull, if you want to know what happens when the Alpha King unchains what the world tried to bury, the first thing she felt when the chains broke was weightlessness. Like pain had been holding her to the earth, and someone had finally cut it loose. Silver hit the stone with a scream that echoed through the basement. Sharp and final, she collapsed forward, breath shattering out of her lungs, hands shaking as feeling rushed back into them in burning waves. Before she could hit the ground, arms caught her, strong, unyielding, warm, in a way she had never known. Warmth could be. She froze, terror and disbelief crashing together inside her chest. Kyle held her like she was something fragile and sacred at the same time. His grip was controlled, reverent, but beneath it his muscles were coiled steel. His wolf paced violently under his skin, furious at the sight of marks left by others. He lowered his head, inhaling her scent again, slower this time, as if memorizing it. The bond roared between them, ancient, undeniable. Every instinct in him screamed to shield her, to burn the world down if it tried to touch her again. Above them, chaos erupted. Shouts echoed down the stairs. Elders arguing, guards panicking. The Luna Ceremony had shattered the moment the Alpha King vanished into the depths, and now fear spread faster than fire. Kale straightened, gathering her against his chest, as if daring anyone to try to take her back. She clutched his cloak without realizing she'd moved, fingers digging in, like he was the only solid thing left in the world. "Easy," he murmured, the word vibrating through her bones. His voice was deep, controlled, but something in it cracked when she flinched. "No one will chain you again." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her body shook, reacting to safety the same way it had once reacted to pain, violently, uncontrollably. Kale turned, placing himself fully between her and the doorway, just as the elders poured in. Torches flared, faces drained of color when they saw her in his arms. "This is forbidden," one elder gasped. "Alpha King, she is." "Mine," Kyle said softly. The word carried power. The torches flickered. Wolves dropped to their knees without understanding why. Kale's eyes burned as he lifted his gaze, dominance rolling off him in suffocating waves. "You hid her. You starved her. You chained her under a sacred hall during a Luna ceremony." His voice lowered, deadly calm. "Explain why I shouldn't tear this pack apart stone by stone." Silence answered him. Guilt, terror, regret that came far too late. She stirred, then lifting her head slowly. For the first time she looked past. Kyle really looked at the people who had decided her life was something to be buried. Her fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest. But something else stirred beneath. Heat, awareness, power. The air hummed around her skin, faint silver light tracing the scars on her wrists. Gasps rippled through the room. "She has no wolf," someone whispered desperately. Kyle felt it the second they spoke. A pulse, low, ancient, awakening. Her body arched suddenly, a sharp cry ripping from her throat as the bond surged fully open. Memories not her own slammed into her, moons older than the pack, bloodlines forgotten, a power that had been sleeping because it had never been allowed to feel safe. Kyle tightened his hold, grounding her, his forehead pressing to hers. "Breathe," he commanded gently. "You're not alone. You never will be again." Her eyes snapped open. Silver fled. The room shook as a wave of lunar energy burst outward, extinguishing torches, cracking stone, forcing every wolf present flat to the ground. Kyle stood unmoving at the center of it, shielding her with his body, his wolf bowing in absolute recognition, not submission, reverence. When the power settled, the silence that followed was holy. She sagged against him, exhausted, trembling, alive in a way she had never been before. Kyle lifted her without effort, turning toward the stairs. "This ceremony is over," he said. "There will be judgment at dawn. Until then, anyone who comes within 10 steps of her without my permission will be executed." No one challenged him. Under the open sky, the moon burned white-hot. As Kyle carried her out of the basement, for the first time in her life, cool night air brushed her skin. Stars spread endlessly above her. She blinked, overwhelmed, tears slipping free without warning. Kyle paused, adjusting his hold so she could see the sky fully. "This," he said quietly, "is yours now." She looked at him then, not as a monster, not as a king, but as the one being fate had been dragging toward her all along. "Why me?" she whispered. Kyle met her gaze, the bond humming steady and fierce between them. "Because they were wrong," he said, "and the moon does not make mistakes." Far above, the pack watched their alpha, King, walk away with the girl they had tried to erase, his mate, his Luna, his reckoning. Whispers spread like wildfire, fear, awe, prophecy reborn, because everyone could feel it now. The chained girl had never been weak. She had been waiting, and the Alpha King had finally answered. If this story pulled you into the dark, if you want to see how a buried Luna rises and how the world pays for what it did, subscribe to Old Whisper Stories now. Dawn did not come gently. It rose like a verdict. Mist clung to the valley as Kale stood on the high stone balcony, the ancient circle below already filling, with wolves summoned by fear rather than loyalty. He had not slept. Neither had she. She sat behind him wrapped in furs, too fine for a girl who had once slept on stone, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the world wake as if it might vanish if she blinked too long. The moon's mark still glowed faintly at her throat, a soft silver pulse that answered only to him. Every breath she took braided tighter into the bond, weaving fate with something sharper, choice. Below, the elders gathered in rigid lines, the ones who had ordered her chains, the ones who had called her nothing. Kyle's voice carried when he spoke, calm, final. "Kneel." They obeyed. Judgment came without spectacle. Names were spoken, crimes listed. Silence fell after each one, heavy as earth thrown on a grave. Some begged, some justified, none were spared. Kale did not roar. He did not shift. He did not need to. Power lived in the restraint of his mercy and its withdrawal. Exile for some, stripping of rank for others. For the worst, the ones who had touched silver to her skin and called it holy. Death before the sun reached its peak. She watched it all with steady eyes, not cold, not cruel, awake. When it was over, Kale turned to her. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Do you want to leave?" he asked softly. "Not as a king, as a mate." She stood. The valley felt larger now that she was no longer buried beneath it. She walked to the edge beside him, her presence sending quiet ripples through the pack. Wolves lowered their gazes without knowing why. The mountain answered her steps. She breathed in pine and sky and blood and felt whole. "No," she said. Then after a beat, "But it will change." Kyle's mouth curved, not a smile. A promise. Days passed, then nights. The bond settled from fire into steel. She learned the pack's rhythms. The way power hummed through the land. The way wolves watched her when they thought she couldn't see. Some with awe, some with fear, a few with hate sharp enough to taste. Kyle never left her unguarded, not because she was weak, but because she was becoming something the old world did not know how to survive. Her wolf came to her in dreams at first, not a beast, a crown of moonlight. When she woke from the dreams, the ground beneath her feet glowed faintly, answering her pulse. The healers whispered. The historians panicked. The elders who remained avoided her eyes. Kyle watched it all, with the calm of someone who had already chosen the ending. "You're not meant to fit," he told her one night as they stood beneath the stars. "You're meant to rule." She turned to him then, silver light reflecting in her gaze. "With you?" He went still. The Alpha King, feared, undefeated, hesitated for the first time in years. Then he nodded. "If you'll have me." Her hand found his. The bond sang. Far beyond the valley, other packs felt it. A shift, an awakening. The moon did not dim, it sharpened. And those who had built their power on buried truths began to fear the dark again. Because the girl they chained in the basement was no longer hidden. She was rising. And this time the world would kneel. The night the other packs arrived, the moon turned the color of old blood. They came not as guests but as warnings. Alpha kings who had ruled through fear. Councils built on buried lies. Wolves who had felt the awakening and knew their age was ending. They called her a mistake, a curse, a threat to balance. They demanded Kale hand her over. For the good of the world. And for the first time since she had been unchained, Kyle was forced to choose between crown and mate. The betrayal came from within, an elder who had smiled at her, who had sworn loyalty, who struck Kale from behind with silver forged for kings. Kyle fell, the bond screamed, the world held its breath, and in that silence she finally understood why she had been hidden, why her wolf had slept, why the moon had waited. She was not born without power, she was born with too much. When she stepped forward alone, the ground cracked beneath her bare feet. Moonlight did not touch her, it bowed. Her wolf emerged not as flesh, but as form and force, ancient and absolute. She spoke one word, and wolves shifted against their will. She lifted one hand, and silver melted like wax. The rival alphas fell to their knees, not in submission, but in terror, because they recognized the truth written into their bloodlines, long before their thrones existed. She was the first Luna reborn, the balance they had tried to erase. She could end them all. They waited for mercy. She looked at Kyle, bleeding, breathing, still reaching for her, and chose differently. Not destruction, judgment. The old councils were broken. The cruel were stripped of power. The age of chaining fear beneath the ground ended forever. At dawn, Kale rose beside her, not as Alpha King alone, but as her equal. And when the moon climbed the sky once more, she stood crowned in silver light, no longer the girl from the basement, but the queen of the moon, ruling not through fear, but through truth so powerful it could no longer be buried. And from that night on, when wolves told stories to their children, they did not warn them of monsters in the dark. They warned them of what happens when you chain what the moon itself has chosen. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the rise, the reckoning, the power, subscribe to Old Whisper Stories, because some legends don't end, they awaken.